There's something modern people often overlook, but anyone who has ever stepped into a medieval home on a 30-degree night feels it immediately. The warmth doesn't come from the fire, it comes from the earth. Medieval people understood that the ground, no matter how cold, held temperature more steadily than the air, and they turned that simple truth into a heating system that many engineers today would still admire. They lowered the floor beneath ground level, creating a semi-subterranean space where wind couldn't sweep through, where the surrounding earth acted like a giant coat that trapped every fragile bit of warmth produced throughout the day. When you step down into that half-sunken floor, you don't see complex techniques, you see a strange kind of silence. And that silence is the sign of a design that has already defeated the cold. And here's the soft hook. The house didn't need fire to stay warmer. It just needed to stand lower than the wind. What makes this system genius isn't the materials, but the mindset. Instead of fighting winter, they slipped beneath it, using the Earth's stability to create a safe pocket of heat, even when the outside world had already dropped to 30-degree Levants. If you lived in the medieval era, would you dare believe that the ground beneath your feet was actually your strongest shield? If the semi-subterranean floor was the shield beneath your feet, then the turf roof and earth walls were the armor wrapped around the entire medieval home. The very things that allowed people to live safely through those 30-degree Feb nights that seemed harmless, but were always waiting to drain every trace of warmth. The turf roof may look like nothing more than a thick mound of grass, but when the cold season descended, it acted like a small hill placed on top of the house, pressing the wind down, locking the heat in, and creating an insulating layer that no modern material can fully replicate. Beneath that roof, the earth and straw walls served a second role. They absorbed the weak warmth of the day and released it back little by little as night settled in. What's astonishing is that medieval people didn't think they were engineering anything. They simply watched nature and built according to what the earth taught them. But that simplicity created the biggest revelation. With the most primitive materials, earth, straw, grass, the house became a quiet heat reservoir, keeping the family warm even when it was cold enough outside for wood to shrink and breath to turn into frost. And think about this. In our modern world, how many homes still hold the power to fight the cold using the very breath of nature itself? In our modern imagination, smoke is just something that rises from the hearth, blackens the roof, and makes medieval people cough. But that's the viewpoint of the modern century, not the truth our ancestors lived with through hundreds of winters. To them, smoke was part of the design, a layer of protection, a subtle heating system we've accidentally forgotten. When the hearth faded to glowing embers and the family began to fall asleep, the smoke didn't escape entirely. It lingered just below the roof, forming a thin but steady layer of warm air, like an invisible blanket hanging above the household. That smoke layer didn't just keep the space below warmer, it also dried the thatched roof, preventing cold moisture from seeping back into the house. What happened next is a twist most people never expect. That same smoke kept the turf roof from shrinking too much as the night grew colder, avoiding those tiny cracks, the silent enemy that could drop the interior temperature dangerously fast within just a few hours. Instead of seeing smoke as a nuisance, medieval people turned it into an ally. They understood that if they controlled the smoke properly, They were controlling the thermal breathing of the house itself. That wasn't accidental. It was a technique sharpened across generations. And perhaps the most surprising truth is this: sometimes the very thing we try to eliminate is the thing that keeps us alive. If you lived in a long house on a 30-degree F night, would you let the smoke escape completely, or keep this natural layer of heat? Share your thoughts, because the smallest choices often make the biggest difference in the battle against winter. If the turf roof and the smoke layer protected the warmth from above, then the straw and ash floor was the shield guarding the heat from beneath, a system medieval people never needed to name, yet fully understood the power of. What made a medieval floor remarkable wasn't the materials themselves, but the way they worked together. Straw held warmth, ash absorbed moisture, and packed earth locked every empty gap shut. Three things that seemed unrelated, but when placed correctly, formed a thermal floor that kept the ground warmer than the outside air even when temperatures dropped to 30 degrees Celsius. When you step onto that floor, you don't feel sophistication. There's no mechanical hum, no sign of technology, just a simple, undeniable sensation. The cold under your feet doesn't rise. And here's the part modern people rarely expect. The ash doesn't just absorb moisture to keep the floor dry, it also blocks cold air from the earth from seeping upward. That dryness matters so much that if someone skipped even one routine of repacking the floor, moisture could pull the house's temperature down faster than any wind outside. Medieval people had no artificial insulation, but they had relentless observation. Packed earth held the warmth, straw added elasticity, and ash locked out cold moisture like a natural valve. Those three layers didn't just make the floor warmer, they turned it into a working component of the home's entire heating system, operating silently through the night. And if you ever thought a floor was just something to walk on, imagine a 30-degree Huff night without this ash and straw layer. You'd realize instantly what truly stands between you and winter. In the medieval world, wind wasn't just weather. It was an invisible force that could drain a home's warmth in just a few hours. Instead of trying to fight it with endlessly thick walls, medieval people chose a bolder strategy. They controlled the wind's path. They rotated their homes toward the dominant winter winds to reduce direct impact, built doorways low so the wind would lose momentum as it entered, and even designed entrances with slight bends or zigzag patterns to create eddies that slowed the wind before it ever reached the living space. What makes this system brilliant is the subtlety hidden inside its simplicity. There were no technical drawings, no modern measuring tools, only generations observing the cold winds slicing across open fields and realizing that adjusting a house by just a few degrees could completely change how well it retained heat. And here's the climax. A house built just a few dozen centimeters off the correct angle could be several degrees colder than its neighbor, enough to turn a 30-degree Fahrenheit into a real test of endurance. Medieval people understood that wind wasn't an unstoppable enemy. It was a variable to be calculated. By slowing it, bending it, and breaking it apart, they turned their homes into safe zones where warmth had a fighting chance to survive. And when we look back at that quiet sophistication, we finally see sometimes the victory over winter doesn't come from new materials, but from learning how to read nature's movements. There's a secret most modern people would never expect. Inside a medieval home, warmth wasn't spread evenly. It was gathered on purpose, treated like a precious resource that had to be managed with discipline. When a 30-degree night settled in, the house wasn't a single unified space. It became a strategic map of 3 zones. The cold zone where drafts still slipped through, the neutral zone where temperatures fluctuated, and the warm zone, the survival heart of the entire family. And this is where medieval people showed a kind of million IQ energy management. We're only now beginning to understand. When the hearth dropped to red embers, everyone shifted gradually into the warmest zone, like an army retreating into a fortress before a long night. Not because they lacked space, but because they understood something very clearly. Spreading out meant dividing the heat. Clustering together meant raising the overall temperature and keeping that precious warmth alive until dawn. Strangely, no one had to say a word, yet everyone followed this survival rhythm. The elderly, the children, even the livestock behind the partitioned wall. And here's the tension that makes this idea legendary. Choosing the wrong sleeping spot, lying too far from the warm zone, or opening a single door at the wrong moment could disrupt the entire thermal balance, causing the warm pocket to collapse far faster than expected. In that space, heat was managed as strictly as food supplies. No one was allowed to waste it. What makes this system admirable isn't complexity. It's their deep understanding of nature. They didn't try to heat the whole house. They protected the strongest point of it. If you were living through a medieval 30-degree night, which zone would you choose? The neutral zone or the warmest one? Share your choice, and let's see whether our instincts still match those of the past. If the warm zone was the heart of a medieval home, then the livestock stall was the secret engine room most modern people have no idea existed. Medieval people understood a simple but incredibly strategic truth. Every animal was a living heat source, a natural heater that released steady warmth throughout the night without burning a single extra stick of wood. What they did wasn't accidental. They transformed their entire winter economy into a thermal system. The livestock stall was usually placed right beside or directly attached to the living space, and it wasn't for convenience. It was to create a thermal buffer zone, a barrier of warm air where heat from the animals' bodies seeped gently through the earth and straw wall, preventing the home's interior from dropping too sharply when temperatures outside fell to 30-degree yans. The heat released by the animals wasn't strong, but it was consistent, and that consistency became the foundation that helped the family maintain warmth through the night. But this is where the tension starts rising. Losing even one animal because of sickness, weather, or an accident meant the entire system lost part of its heat source. The next night would be colder, the warm zone would shrink, and everyone had to adjust their sleeping positions, repack the floor, and even recalibrate the smoke layer in the roof. One small change was enough to force the whole house to operate differently. Medieval people never separated economy from survival. They turned every asset into energy. And when we look back at that, we realize they didn't just raise livestock to live. They relied on them to outlast the winter. On 30-degree nights, when a medieval home had already gathered its warmth into the safest zone, the final strategy for holding heat didn't depend on fire or materials. It depended on the people themselves. Cluster sleeping wasn't a habit. It was a thermal tactic passed down through generations, where body heat became a shared energy source instead of being wasted into the freezing air. The whole family lay close together in a near ritual pattern. The stronger members slept at the edges to block drafts, while the weaker and younger ones stayed in the center, where temperatures were the most stable. What's astonishing is that sleeping positions weren't fixed. Each night, they rotated to balance warmth and reduce temperature gaps between members. A distance of just a few handspans could cause a person to lose heat faster than the outside wind, which is why everyone understood that no one could drift too far from the cluster. This is the climax of the entire system. The people themselves became part of the heat machine the house had worked so carefully to create. No one stood outside it. Every breath, every movement contributed to keeping the whole group alive. And that moment reminds us that in the medieval world, survival wasn't an individual effort. It was the art of staying connected. When a 30-degree of night settled in, a medieval home was no longer a passive shelter. It became a heat machine the entire family had to operate with discipline. And the nightly ritual began. Not a household chore list, but a winter protocol. A sequence of actions carried out with the same precision as a captain inspecting the deck before a snowstorm. The head of the household moved around each corner like a silent captain, touching the earthen walls to check for new cracks, testing draft points to be sure no cold current was waiting to slip in, repacking the straw and ash floor to lock moisture beneath their feet, adjusting the vent opening so the smoke layer in the roof stayed thick enough to hold warmth without suffocating the room. Every action had a purpose, and every mistake carried real consequences. And here's the political flex that makes this moment legendary. Medieval people didn't wait for the house to protect them. They commanded it. They treated every detail like a gear in a winter warship, because a single small leak, a vent left unclosed, or a gap that wasn't repacked could make the temperature drop fast enough to collapse the entire heating system they'd spent all day preparing. No one went to sleep before the captain confirmed everything was ready, because in their world, survival didn't rely on luck, it relied on discipline. And once you understand this ritual, you finally see their true strength. They defeated winter with strategy, not muscle. There's a strange moment that happens when we look back at everything medieval people built. Not a single element is truly powerful on its own, but once they connect, they become a system far more sophisticated than we ever imagine. The semi-sunken floor stabilizes heat from below. The turf roof and earthen walls turn the house into a wind-resistant armor. The smoke layer hanging under the roof works like a thermal blanket. The straw and ash floor locks out moisture. The house's orientation controls the wind. The warm zone gathers energy. Livestock heat creates a buffer. Cluster sleeping preserves body warmth. And finally, the nightly operating ritual. A chain of discipline where no step is allowed to be missing. Here's the soft hook. Medieval people didn't defeat winter because they were stronger than us. They won because they learned how to turn their home into an ally, not just a shelter. Looking back, what saved them wasn't just fire, or earth, or straw. It was their ability to see value in things that looked ordinary. They connected nature, materials, discipline, and even human breath into a single unified system. And from that, we understand something important. Cold doesn't defeat the weak. It defeats those who don't know how to operate their environment. If you were living through a medieval 30-degree of night, which of these 10 elements do you think would save you first? Share your thoughts. because sometimes the way you see things opens a new understanding of the silent war against winter. And if you enjoy stories about ancient survival engineering, the hidden secrets buried in medieval architecture and daily life, follow the channel so you don't miss any journey into this world.